So, Steve Farley.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so thrilled to have this opportunity to address a crowd that's so tuned in with wanting to create change in Arizona. And I've come down here for years and years and years, since long before I was even an elected official, I think, talking about transportation issues.
Oh, okay.
So I've always gotten such a great response from people because you guys are really plugged into stuff and you really want to create change. So is anybody here ready to change this state?
Come on. Yeah. Whoa.
Well, I'm really excited about the opportunity of doing that because this is the year we can make it happen. And as upset as everybody was, I think, by the outcome of the election in November 2016, and my youngest daughter, Gigi, she locked herself in a room for 3 days while binge watching Hillary videos and sobbing. So I think a lot of us felt that way to a certain extent. But I think we can look back on that day as the day complacency died. And that's a very good thing. People no longer feel like the things are going to get taken care of without their active involvement. People understand that democracy dies of neglect. And democracy in this country is too precious for us to be able to allow to die. We've got to stand up and do our part. And people are doing it everywhere I go all over the state. For the last 18 months, I have seen it everywhere. It's not just Democrats, although Democrats are so energized. We've quadrupled the number of Democratic precinct committee people since Trump was elected across Arizona. That means for every person that was knocking doors last cycle, there was another 3 right by your side right now knocking those doors. That's exciting. But it's also independents and Republicans changing. I'm seeing across the aisle, people just want grown-ups in the room, solving problems. They're done with reality show stars. They're done with ideological warriors. They just want people to solve our problems. And we certainly know that there's been a lot of problems created for us by this governor and this legislature. And I've been witness to that for the last 12 years. I've served in the legislature for 12 years, 6 in the House, 6 in the Senate. I'm currently the Senate Assistant Minority Leader. I was the House Assistant Minority Leader before that. I'm the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee. I serve on the Joint Legislative Budget Committee and the Appropriations Committee, and I was the ranking member of the House Ways and Means Committee before that. So I have an in-depth knowledge of the finances, the budget. All policies that will come before the governor have already come before me as a member of the legislature. I understand the players, I understand the people, the perspectives on all sides. I know what policies can work and what can't, and I know the process of the legislature, the individual personalities. I know, as governor especially, I know how to use a carrot and I know how to use a stick when necessary. I will be able to be effective as governor from day one. And I'm actually the only Democratic candidate running who has ever had any elected official experience. No one else has been an elected official. And having 12 years in the legislature is arguably the most important experience for a governor to have. I know there have been governors in the past who have come into office and they've just thrown up their hands and said, what the heck do I do with this strange body called the legislature? But I'm not intimidated, and I understand it inside out, and I've been able to actually be effective in a lot of different ways. One of the crowning moments of my time in the legislature is when Jan Brewer, of all people, reached out and said, do you think you can keep the caucus together if I decide to expand Medicaid to 400,000 people in poverty? Wow. And I said, yes, we can. And we got together, kept the caucus together. We found 4 Republicans. We rolled the speaker, we rolled the president, we got it done, we saved lives, and we kept our hospitals afloat. We did that working across the aisle to get it done. That's called solving problems. And we can get that to happen. We can get it to happen across the board in a lot of different ways. I also, for the last, since 1991, I've run my own business. My first job was as a typesetter. And depending on the age of the people I talk to, sometimes I have to explain what a typesetter is or was. I had this big machine I used to have to sit in front of, and all sorts of things I did. Fonts didn't used to come from a pull-down menu. I used to have a lot of very useful skills. And then automation happened. And I worked my way up to being art director at the newspaper I worked for, and I actually converted over their production from typesetting to computers and Pork Express software. After I did all that, ultimately I decided I have all these skills. I'm going to start my own business. I had no idea how to do that. I had never run a business. I didn't have any clients. I didn't have any equipment. But I did read a book called Growing a Business by Paul Hawken. Do you remember Smith and Hawken, the mail order firm in the 80s that was so big? Well, Paul Hawken wrote a book called Growing a Business, and I read it cover to cover, and I took it to heart. In it, he described a bank that was founded by a bunch of former big bankers who had gotten tired of denying loans to people they knew were good risks, but didn't quite meet the numbers they were supposed to meet for the big banks. So I decided to have them put their money where their mouth is. And I found that bank, I went in front of them, I made my case. Again, no clients, no equipment, no experience. I walked out of there with an $18,000 loan. I had to pay it back starting the next month at $500 a month. That's putting your whole family out there on a limb. That's the entrepreneurial spirit, taking that risk, but I'm willing to work hard. And that's one of those things that I'm doing really well on this campaign, working very hard. Nobody's going to outwork this candidate, I'll tell you that. And I worked hard enough that not only did I pay back that first month's $500, I paid back the whole loan 18 months early.
Oh, wow.
And I've still got that business going today. In 1997, I invented a way for putting photographs on glazed ceramic tile, and I do murals all over the country using that process. The one you may be familiar with is those murals just east of downtown Tucson on Broadway. Yeah. The big black and white photo murals of people walking down the street in the 50s. That's my work. So I do those all over the country. And they're all about competing, getting these commissions, and then working with the community to find out what their best hopes are and reflecting them back to them. Ideally, good public art should be about something that people see not as that thing that guy did, but our mural. And that's the way people think about it. Absolutely important. So I've got both sides of my brain going, right side and left side, and I think that's what we need to solve some of our intractable problems we've got these days. And that's what I've tried to do in the legislature. Probably the most important thing I've done for the last almost quarter century is I've been a dad. I've got two daughters. My oldest daughter, Amelia, just graduated from Washington University in St. Louis last year. She's now, you know it? Good, there we go. I'm grateful she got a full ride because it's very expensive. She's now living in Brooklyn, working in New York in a gallery, and at night she's being paid doing electronic music DJing. So she's living this amazing adventurous life. I always raise my daughters to be adventurers. She went through Arizona public schools, and my youngest daughter did as well. My youngest daughter just graduated from Tucson High last May. Big urban district school, and I saw through those 4 years in particular the devastation wrought upon our public education system by this governor and this legislature. Yeah. And it's not pretty. At Tucson High, they have 6 counselors for 3,200 students. Wow. And that's a pretty high ratio for Arizona because it's 1 to 900 across the state. Oh my gosh. They have a third of the computers they need, and the average age of those computers is 12 years old. Wow. And you know, computer years are longer than dog years, so that's pretty bad. They have 10% of their classrooms are locked away because they're hazardous to inhabit. That's directly because we used to have a formula called the Building Renewal Formula. It was put in place in 1998 in the Students First Initiative. It said you had to spend a certain amount every year to fix our schools and keep them in good working order. It should be about $300 million a year right now. We've only been funding that about 10% of what it should be for the last 10 years. So what you get is classrooms with roofs collapsing, literally. You have HVAC systems held together with duct tape. And when you're not investing in keeping your schools safe and comfortable, you're also not investing in jobs for local tradespeople. So you're hurting local economies and hurting jobs as well. Instead, this governor has been shipping off that money to out-of-state corporate tax cuts that don't do a thing for our economy. I mean, ironically, what really does something for your economy is investing in a public education system. What's hurting our economy is companies not moving here because they don't see a sustainably trained workforce or a commitment to funding our public education system. There's a reason Amazon didn't look at us for a second headquarters because of our public education system. There's a reason why Chandler's Intel plant is still here, but it's only here because they have so much stranded capital. They've said publicly they would be gone by now if they hadn't stranded all the capital up there at that Chandler plant. We are hurting our economy, we're hurting our society, and 1 in 4 kids live in poverty in this state. And the best tool we've ever invented to have people lift themselves from poverty is a great public education system. And we've ripped it apart. It has to stop. 52.8% of our teaching positions right now in Arizona are either vacant or held by somebody without proper qualifications. Thousands of teachers have left already. Other states treat us like a farm team. They literally do. They offer $10,000, $20,000, or $30,000 signing bonuses to take our best teachers away. Other teachers are working 2 or 3 jobs. Some have left the profession entirely. Teachers didn't just start walking out in April. They've been walking out for years permanently. And the teachers who are still there saw it. And they understood that their students are suffering. My parents were both public school teachers. I know what teachers feel about their kids. Their classroom kids are no different from their biological. I wish they'd love my sister and I a little bit more. But that's the way teachers are. And that's the way they should be. My parents spent a lot of our money buying supplies for their kids in their classroom when their district wouldn't provide it. So teachers care deeply about the future of their kids, and the teachers in Arizona have seen the future of their classroom kids compromised. So in April, they finally decided they'd had enough, and they didn't walk out on their kids, they walked out for their kids. Amen. And we saw that Red for Ed movement in April. It was phenomenal to see that happen. When you had tens of thousands of teachers occupying the state capitol for a full week, 70,000, they were filling Washington Street from the Chase Field to the Capitol, curb to curb. That picture was amazing, sea of red. Jan Brewer tweeted that picture, and her caption was, "The sleeping giant awakens." She hammered Doug Ducey for the entire day that was going on Phoenix television.
Oh, wow.
Doug Ducey's last offer for teacher, he knew he needed to do something, so his last and best offer, he said, for funding public education in K-12 was $33 million for the next year over and above inflation and enrollment growth. That was on Wednesday. Then the teachers walked out. Then on Thursday, all of a sudden, he was all about 20% raises by 2020. Now that was all a brand. It didn't really turn out to be the way it was. But that next week, some of us were working hard behind the scenes to get that sustainable and get as high as we could get within this context, knowing it's just the beginning. And the teachers' presence there as witnesses was absolutely vital. By the end of that budget week the next week, that $33 million offer became $405 million in new money for K-12 education in next year alone, permanent and in the base. And the teachers' presence did that, along with those of us who were fighting on the inside. It was amazing. That Sunday, budget week, I knew immediately that this little 24/7 teacher village at the Capitol was going to require a village newspaper. So I used my Facebook page as the village newspaper. So every time I got a leaked document, every time I got information about a meeting that they needed to know about, an explanation of how this place worked, I posted on my Facebook page. It was shared 1,000 times within an hour. On Monday, I showed up early before the floor session began, and I trained the teachers in the gallery how not to get kicked out of the Senate, because there are decorum rules in the Senate, so if you applaud too much, you can get kicked out. So I suggested that instead of applauding, they use jazz hands.
Yeah.
And teachers love rules, so they spread the rules everywhere, and pretty soon the whole week, you had teachers, even outside, using jazz hands. And they were really happy, standing jazz hands. It was amazing to see that spread out through the whole thing. That budget night, you know, the Republicans in the legislature have always chosen the middle of the night to do their final debate on the budget. They don't want people to see all the details of what's going in. But I've always taken it upon myself in my previous 11 years to lead debate on the floor, to pick apart what's in the budget, what's the problems, what are the amendments that could change this, how can we make it better? And I've been up all night with my colleagues asleep around me, railing to an empty gallery, high on Dr. Pepper, and getting that word out. But this year, the gallery was not empty, it was packed to the gills. And not only the gallery, the first floor lobby, the third floor lobby, the plaza between the House and the Senate. On the lobbies in the Senate, you had these TV screens where they could watch the live proceedings. It was like when an airport closes when the flights are canceled. Everyone's all laid out there watching all night long. It was amazing. I would make a good point. They do standing jazz hands, like a flock of butterflies up there silently in the gallery. 4 seconds later, because of the broadcast delay, you'd hear a roar come up everywhere else outside the chamber. Amazing experience. At 4:45 in the morning, I gave my summing up speech on the floor. And somebody in the gallery, one of the teachers, filmed it and put it on Facebook. An 11-minute political speech about budget in the middle of the night. Doesn't strike you as a viral video usually. But 53,000 people viewed it in the next week.
Right.
And I'm really excited about what that meant from a lot of perspectives. Not only people tuning into policy, because I do believe you can have better living through good policy, but also what it means for turnout. Traditionally, one of the biggest problems we've had in elections and midterm elections is youth vote. 18 to 34-year-olds only voted 11% rate in November 2014. A lot of those teachers were under 35. And when you look at the demographics of who watched my video on Facebook, through the roof, the people that watched it all the way through most intensely were women aged 25 to 34. They're going to be voting. No one's going to keep them from that ballot box this year. And they're going to get in their friends and their family and everyone they encounter, because they have gotten the world's largest civics lesson in one place in Red for Ed Week. They've all gone home to their own communities. Hundreds have signed up to volunteer for my campaign, and they're all over the state. They're galvanized to change this state and make me governor. And I see that as a really exciting development. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. And we know it's going to happen despite all those Koch brothers funded ads that have been happening since January all over your TV screens, because they have not had an effect at all. I don't know if you saw the NBC News poll that came out a couple of days ago. They asked Arizona voters of all parties, do you think Doug Ducey deserves re-election? Or do you think someone else should get a try? Only 26% think Doug Ducey should be re-elected, and 59% think someone else should get a try. And the Koch brothers have a lot of money, but I think this is the year it doesn't work.
Good.
This is the boy who cried wolf. They do not trust this governor, the voters don't. And they don't see him as the guy who can lead us through as a state. They see him as a governor who's been governing for a couple of billionaires from Kansas, but not for the people of Arizona. And that's not just Democrats feeling that way, that's Republicans and independents as well. We have an opportunity not just to win this election, but to heal our democracy at the same time. And that's one of the things I'm most concerned about, is the polarization we've seen in this country, where people look at each other as enemies instead of fellow Americans who disagree. The Russians have been taking advantage of it. We created this. They didn't create it. We created those conditions. They're just exploiting the conditions. We can't allow that to happen. And I know there's opportunities for us to work together. Let me tell you a little bit about one of the things I've been focusing on that I know we can work together on as Senate Finance ranking member. And I've been on this for 12 years. When we spend on a budget, everything we spend on as a budget, as a state, is about $10 billion a year. We give away each year about $13.7 billion a year in corporate sales tax loopholes as well. Those are things like, here's an example. If you buy a 3-inch pipe at the hardware store, you pay sales tax. If you buy a 4-inch pipe, you don't. That doesn't make sense unless you're a corporation that happens to buy a lot of 4-inch pipe in Arizona. Funny thing is, there is one. It's a Nevada corporation you may have heard of called Southwest Gas. Every month we pay our bill. They take some of that money. They go and hire a lobbyist who goes to the legislature and gives themselves a break. There are 330 other corporate sales tax loopholes just like this, and they never get reviewed. Some are 60 years old. And $13.7 billion is a floor, not a ceiling, because 40% of them we don't even know how much we're losing. It's not accounted for. If we could eliminate just $3 billion worth of those corporate sales tax loopholes, we could lower our sales tax rate by a full % while increasing education spending by $2 billion a year. And that's not only enough to give 20% teacher raises right now. You can get 20% raises to all the education support professionals. You could invest in all-day K, pre-K. It's restore the 4th year of JTED career and technical education programs. Remember, Doug Ducey tried to kill our JTED programs his first year out of the office. That you could restore a building renewal formula, our district additional assistance for computers and textbooks. You can restore funding to our Pima County and Maricopa County community colleges, which have been zeroed out since 2009. And our universities have lost $2.5 billion, so you can start reinvesting in our universities again. And we can do it while lowering sales taxes and making our tax code less regressive. All this takes is leadership, and that's exactly what I'll provide. Now, here's how I know we can do this together. One of the ways I keep myself sane in the legislature is I try to find people that I disagree with the most and figure out what we can work together on. There's a senator named David Farnsworth from East Mesa, very conservative Tea Party guy. Don't have a lot in common with a lot of his policy issues, but when he first came in, I pitched him an idea. If you grew a tomato in your school garden and you sliced it to serve in your school cafeteria, you were committing a crime. That didn't make sense to me, it didn't make sense to him. We agreed to have some stakeholder meetings, we got some legislation through, and now if you slice that tomato in your school cafeteria, you're not going to jail.
Oh, for God's sake.
So that's good. It's not earth-shaking, but it builds a relationship. Last year, Senator Farnsworth became the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. A very powerful position. I came to him with a bill, SB 1144. I explained it to him and said basically this was about forcing review of all corporate sales tax loopholes every 10 years, at least every 10 years. If they could justify themselves for the overall economy, keep them. If they couldn't, then get rid of them and recover those revenues. He signed on as a co-sponsor of my Democratic bill with my Democratic name on it. Democratic bills often don't get heard in this partisan legislature. He heard it in his Senate Finance Committee, where it passed unanimously, and it passed the Senate floor 28-2, with some of the most conservative members of the Senate voting in favor. That is really exciting to me because I know that demonstrates that even the Tea Party shares with us the idea that special interest giveaways are a bad thing to do. Now, I have seen that in other places as well. There's a supervisor from Mojave County named Buster Johnson who wrote an op-ed in the Havasu News last summer, which was published in a lot of rural areas. He's a very conservative Tea Party guy, and he said Doug Ducey was a hypocrite. He said he was a hypocrite because, as he explained in the op-ed, he brags about balancing the state budget without raising taxes. But all he did was shove responsibilities and costs onto cities and counties who had to raise their taxes to balance their budgets. And again, the Tea Party doesn't like that any more than we do. I speak really good Republican, so I go on conservative talk radio a lot. And I've had people call in several times and say, you know, I've never heard a Democrat speak before, but you make sense. We can actually talk about important policy and directives that can move us forward in language that people understand on all sides of the political spectrum and move forward together. We can heal our democracy while winning this election. And that's something we have to do. This country is too precious to let it go and get chopped up into the kind of dialogue that we've had in recent years. We can work together to win this election. I know we can get it done. And I'm seeing that all over the state with people rising up to want change. And you see it when you see a 26% wanting Doug Ducey's reelection and 59% wanting somebody else. People want a grown-up in the room to solve problems. They're ready for changes. They're ready for somebody who focuses on Arizona and gets this done. So I'm thrilled about the opportunity right now. I am running against the Koch brothers. They have a lot of money. I don't have a couple billionaires in my pocket, but I have thousands and thousands of everyday Arizonans who are giving what they can. And we are about $1.2 million raised so far this campaign. So we're going to have the resources to be able to go there and compete. That's about twice as much money as my nearest competitor on the Democratic side. We're going to be able to win this election, and we're going to be able to do it with Arizonans leading the way. I'm thrilled about that opportunity. So those of you who have given on the way in, I'm grateful. If you can give on the way out, I'll be even more grateful. Because it does take money to run these campaigns. You've got to play by the rules before you can try to change them when you're in office. And I'm willing to do the hard work necessary to make it happen. Last week I spent 46 hours on the phone. I spent 55 hours on the phone the week before. And I'm traveling all over the state and meeting as many people as I can to get this done. But even more important than money, I think if you could go home today and talk to 10 of your friends and have them talk to 10 of your friends and tell them that there's a guy running for governor who has the experience to be able to govern from day one and lead us to where we know we can go. That there's a guy running who knows how to win. I'm the only Democratic candidate that's ever won an election. I've won 6 in a row. So I know how to win. And there's a guy who could help lead us to where we need to go, where we're not a joke on late night television anymore. When the Koch brothers start lying about me on TV, they won't believe the ads. they're going to believe you because they know you and they trust you. So spread the word. Let people understand. We love this state. Arizona is an amazing place. The climate, the people, the culture, the food, everything about it is amazing. We've just been so poorly led. Imagine what we could be with good leadership. Imagine a government that's dedicated to public service instead of its own private enrichment. Imagine a possibility of all of us rising together with the assistance of a government that cares about all of us and actually doesn't just think about the next election period, but thinks 20, 30 years down the line. We can do that, and we can do it together, but I need your help. Are you with me?
Yes.
Thank you. Very good. So I'm a total policy wonk, as you may have heard or may have read in my Farley reports. So I love taking questions. So what questions do you have that you'd like to hear from me? Yes?
How are we going to get the ERA from Arizona?
Well, that's something that we need to do. And sometimes, you know, the last 2 years I've been honored to second that motion. My leader, Katie Hobbs, she made the motion to try to force debate on the floor. And we were able to get debate on the floor of the Senate, but sadly the Republican women killed our effort to make it happen. So you're going to have, there are some cases where I really believe that we ought to be able to change people's minds, but in some cases you can't change their minds, so you got to change their bodies at the ballot box. And I think that this may be a case where that happens. I've got 2 daughters, and there's no reason they should be getting 70% of what they would have made if I'd had sons.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
That's right.
What else do we have? Yes?
Some of your positions on prison reform, another terrible thing in Arizona.
Thank you for asking that. Private prisons are a moral, ethical, and economic disaster, and I will end them as governor. And I'm not just going to say that, I'm going to tell you specifically why. Number one, part of why they're a moral disaster is that imagine the idea that a state should sign a contract with a private corporation to guarantee 100% occupancy means that you are incentivized to take away the freedom of people for longer periods of time to be able to give money to a private corporation. And they don't even save you money. We used to have required in law a private prison cost study. It was eliminated from law by this legislature and this governor once it started proving that they weren't saving us money. They were costing us money. But here's how you fix the whole thing. Our biggest problem is that we have a corrections director who isn't focused on corrections, he's focused on punishment. His name is Chuck Ryan. Before he was at the head of the Department of Corrections in Arizona, he was better known as the guy who designed Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. Remember the torture? That one. He is, needless to say, not as interested in corrections as he is in punishment. The fact is, even by the Department of Corrections information that they put out every month, they estimate that 70% of the prisoners released every year, and there's 19,000 released every year in total, 70% have an active substance abuse problem. That's about 14,000 prisoners. Chances are that's what got them in trouble in the first place. And they're released with an active substance abuse problem. They're going right back into the same old trouble, and they're going to come back. Now that may help your private prison, it doesn't help our society. We have a small program. About 900 a year of these prisoners are treated for substance abuse addiction before they are released. That program is proven to cut recidivism in half. So half the people are coming back once they're treated. Why wouldn't you treat all of them? Because if you treat all the 14,000 with problems when they're released, then there's 7,000 fewer coming back to prison. It's cheaper to treat than incarcerate. And not only that, when there's 7,000 fewer coming back to prison, there's 7,000 fewer crimes, at least, and 7,000 fewer crime victims, at least. And you save the money from the court proceedings and all that horror that crime victims have to go through. So you've got a win-win-win-win-win scenario simply by investing in treatment. And then those 7,000 people can contribute to society and be a part of our economy instead of being incarcerated at a huge cost, which otherwise could be going to public schools instead of private prisons. If we do that, we would no longer have any need for private prisons. All that takes is vision and leadership, and that's exactly what we'll provide in that area. Thank you. Yes?
So
How would you work with Mr. Farnsworth about corporate tax credits going to private schools?
Well, the private school thing is something luckily we're going to be able to take care of ourselves. We have a voucher system right now.
Wait, would you repeat the?
Oh, the question is, how would you work with Republicans to stop our public money from going to private schools? I've seen over the last 12 years the increase of the voucher system. At first, when it was first introduced, when I was back 12 years ago, it was just a little tiny program for a very small sliver of disabled kids. Every year it's gotten more and more. That voucher system reached its top when Doug Ducey signed, not into law, luckily, I'll tell you why, but signed a bill that would make a universal private school voucher system for all 1.1 million kids in Arizona. The only 3 congratulatory tweets he got from that were from Grover Norquist, that guy who said you should shrink government the size or drown in the bathtub, from Jeb Bush, and from Betsy DeVos. Again, those were not Arizonans, in case you didn't keep counting. Those were his friends from out of state who he's trying to impress so he can become president someday. Which is, people in his administration have talked about that. Luckily, the reason that didn't become law is that would take $5,200 per student away from a local public district school and give it to a private school or a home school without any accountability. That's what the voucher system does. When that bill was not signed, or when it was signed, it was referred to the ballot thanks to the help of a whole lot of brave volunteers, parents, teachers, all sorts of other folks who went out and referred it to the ballot, which we'll be able to vote on in November. And that is Proposition 305. So I would urge you all to tell all your friends, along with voting for me for governor, is to vote no on Prop 305. Because that way, I've been voting no on vouchers for 12 years. You get to join me in November. So vote no on 305, tell your friends, and that's the way we can preserve our public school system and stop the complete privatization of the system. So that's what we can do, and we can do it ourselves. Getting some people in the legislature, I mean, you know, there are people in the legislature, the majority, who have called public schools government schools for years.
Yes.
As a way of casting aspersions upon them.
Yes.
So this is another case where in some of these situations, you may not be able to change the minds of some folks, so you have to change their bodies at the ballot box. And I think there's an opportunity of doing that too. I think we have an opportunity of winning a majority for Democrats in the Senate and coming close in the House, along with winning our statewide offices. So we have an opportunity to be able to put a stop to it here, because we should not be using public money on unaccountable private entities.
No.
So, yes.
So I don't have a policy question, but I'm not good at math. I'm just curious. 59% want to change, 23% want Ducey.
The other ones are undecided.
Oh.
But if you add together the undecided plus Ducey's 26%, you don't get enough to overcome the 59%.
I see.
Yeah,
I see.
you still end up with 51%
People just
even if you put
can't
the
decide, can they?
Well, yeah, but I think this election will make it pretty clear. That's what's really interesting, is that is what we've gotten as a result from this statewide poll. After 6 months of nonstop advertising, trying to tell us that Doug Ducey is a great education supporting governor. Now, remember, last year, in the State of the State, he said he was finally going to pay teachers what they were worth, and his offer, as it turned out, was 0.4% raises. $15 a month. I had teachers on my Facebook page saying, oh boy, I can go to the movies once a month by myself. That was not working, and that led directly to what was going on. That's why even Jan Brewer is hammering on it, because he doesn't want to fund it. I mean, this is the thing, is we have people, when you have somebody who's governing for the state, not for us, but for a couple of out-of-state billionaires, they're only interested in reducing their taxes. They don't care whether our public school system is terrible. They don't care whether our road system is terrible. They don't care whether we're getting good economic development here. They don't care about our quality of life. They care about reducing the taxes. And that's different. I mean, that's one of the things we saw that also proves that, is last fall, you may remember the Graham-Cassidy bill. That was in Congress, that would have eliminated the Affordable Care Act without replacement.
Oh, yeah.
Doug Ducey came, as soon as that was announced, Doug Ducey came right out and said, I'm all for it. Then our nonpartisan economists from the Joint Legislative Budget Committee they came out with an analysis that said that it would cost our state $11 billion over 10 years, and 500,000 people would be kicked off of health care. How did he respond? He doubled down and said, I'm still for it, because you got to get rid of Obamacare. You connect the dots, you go back to that previous summer. The Koch network gave a press conference in Colorado Springs at their conference, where they said they had $400 million to spend on Republican candidates in this 2018 election. But they weren't going to spend any of it until they got rid of Obamacare. So there was a choice that Doug Ducey faced between either serving the people who elected him or serving the people who fund his campaign. And you saw what he chose. We're not going to be able to trust him to do good health care for us in Arizona. And now we're facing an age in which we have a federal government who is now talking about cuts to even Medicare and Social Security. We're going to need to have strong leadership here in Arizona to be able to resist that, because we can't allow our people to be hurt. Yes?
Hi, Steve.
Hi. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I wanted to ask you, I'm concerned about the Koch brothers,
Yeah.
who, like so many billionaires, have a way of ingratiating themselves in a community by building hospitals, or they're contributing to the University of Arizona and to ASU, money to develop that leadership at the education
Right.
department, huge amounts. And this is very concerning to me, because it's kind of establishing a way of brainwashing kids from very young.
Which is the idea.
Is there any way that as governor you can say to a university, that a state school, that if they take money from the Koch brothers, they will not be eligible for any state funding?
Right. Well, there's a lot of things I want to share about this, because what you're talking about is the freedom schools that are being funded at U of A and ASU and now at NAU.
Oh, great.
It's not just them taking money from the Koch brothers universities, but taxpayer money is now being put in there in the budgets. So far, I think it's $12 million or $10 million of taxpayer money over the last 3 years have been put into these so-called freedom schools at U of A and ASU, and there'll be more coming in. They've actually hoarded about $9 million of that and not spent it at all.
Right.
But they did spend a little over $1 million, maybe $2 million, on things like first editions of the Federalist Papers and various items that were historical collectibles that do nothing to actually do the mission. So that's the good news, is they're not actually spending a lot of time educating. They're just hoarding their money and collecting rare items of our founding fathers. The bad news is that what they are doing with educating isn't working very well. It is not helping our overall society and helping our kids get educated. It's singularly ironic to me that the Koch brothers would use public money to fund a public institution to teach kids that it's bad to use public money to fund public institutions. So if that's a lesson they're teaching, then I think there's a lot of very confused college students right now. That it's amazing. If you want to have your own private college and teach your own private thing to your own private students about everything you want to, you're free to do that. You're welcome to do it. But then to get your friends in the governor's office and the majority of this legislature to take taxpayer money and spend it on your own private interests, that's a problem. And it's what they say they're against. So to answer your question, the governor gets to sign or veto a budget. And if there is money for the freedom schools in there, I won't be signing. We should not be using public money to underwrite a private institution. That's not what we do. We should be investing our money in our public school, and our universities in particular, because that's been the essential problem, is we have cut our universities to such an extent that they're now looking everywhere for sources of funding.
Yeah.
We're less than 10% of the state funding is less than 10% of our universities' budgets right now. And that's when you see all those tuition increases that have gone up. That's all happened because this legislature, this governor, has been cutting our public universities by tremendous amounts over the last 10 years. It's actually a total of $2.5 billion since 2009 cut to our universities. And that's our original economic engine. I mean, we should be investing in our public universities because that is what creates the businesses of the future. We shouldn't be doing Doug Ducey's economic strategy, which is to find some sketchy, hot new company somewhere else and bribe them to come here. That didn't work out too well with Theranos. Remember the Theranos story? That blood testing company that came into Arizona. Doug Ducey was all excited about them and pushed it through. There was a bill that they pushed through to allow them to start operating. These are blood tests where they get a finger prick of blood, and it supposedly would tell you all about everything you needed just from the finger prick. You can do it yourself. Turned out that the technology was a disaster. It didn't work. It gave false positives, false negatives, and puts people's health at disaster. Now the company's gone bankrupt, and the founder of the company has been indicted for federal fraud. That bill went through. I was one of only 2 legislators to vote against it, because I don't believe that our people should be used as guinea pigs for unproven technology. You hear a lot about the importance of, from Doug Ducey, about the importance of removing burdensome regulations. Well, when you substitute the term environmental protections or consumer protections or health protections for burdensome regulations, that doesn't sound so good anymore. And that's what we've seen. Remember, I think it was December of 2016, when Ducey put up on the executive tower a big billboard that said, "Welcome Uber." The Ubers who were self-driving were experimenting in California. They left California. He said it was because they were fleeing burdensome regulations. 6 weeks later, it turned out that they actually were kicked out of California because 16 of their vehicles ran red lights while people were in crosswalks. And then this last year, an Uber self-driving car killed a woman in Tempe without even braking or swerving. And the company, it turned out, had disconnected the emergency braking system while the robot was driving the car.
Well, that's a good idea.
Who even thinks like that? So that's what happens when you don't have these consumer protections, when you don't have these public health protections, when you believe that you could get a company coming from somewhere else, and you think so little of your own citizens that they allow them to experiment on us without us even knowing what's going on. That's a problem. The way you grow the economy is investing in our education system at every level, growing that sustainably trained workforce, growing the investment in our public education system, investing in small businesses and entrepreneurs, investing in our universities to create the new businesses of the future. There's so much we can do to invest in ourselves instead of simply giving our money away in large out-of-state corporate tax cuts. We need to have a strategic vision for the long term, not just a short-term vision. I'll take one more.
So I have a pet peeve talking about universities, and particularly state universities. Why can't the legislature or somebody put a cap on what they're going to pay presidents, what they're going to pay basketball coaches and football coaches, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they raise tuition.
No, that's something that really upsets me. I think if people are going to work for a public institution, they should be willing to work for it for no more than $200,000 a year. Because after all, $200,000 a year is the 95th percentile of our economy and family household in this country. You should be able to get, that's a really good income. I think people ought to serve the public for the sake of serving the public and understand what a privilege that is. And that's why I was so outraged that we saw in Doug Ducey's administration, while he was proposing those 0.4% teacher raises, he was giving his own inner circle political appointees 20% raises, plus bonuses, plus promotions. His public information officer earns $164,000 a year in taxpayer money. When a reporter asks him, how can you justify that when you do a 0.4% raise for teachers? He said, you have to pay good people good wages. Now, how does that sound to an 8-year science teacher of an 8th grade math class, to 8th grade class with 38 kids in the classroom with a master's degree who's earning $38,000 a year? You know, there's a problem. I guess when you end up going into government and leading a government when you don't believe that government can do anything good, then you set about just simply making sure that your friends get lots of money on the way out. That's not the way we ought to do it. That's one of the things that's going to be absolutely dramatically different. The people who work for my administration won't be doing it for the money. They'll be doing it because they believe in public service and they understand that we can help Arizona rise together. They will believe in the mission of their department that they are serving, not simply be there to put something on their resume or make some money. I mean, we had a guy, Ducey appointed, who was the director of DES, Department of Economic Security, they give out food stamps. He was fired. He did a whole series of crazy things while he was in office, and he was fired ultimately for buying drinks for everyone in his office after they're celebrating how many people they'd fired in the department that week. But then after he was fired, now remember, Doug Ducey said 2 weeks before he was fired that he wished he could clone him, that he was that good as a director. After he was fired, it turned out that he had had a private militia with 80,000 rounds of ammunition he had bought in the basement of DES. He had designed the uniforms with happy faces on the back. These are the kind of people that Doug Ducey has hired and thinks he could clone. We have to have a government that actually responds to us, who believes in the mission, who's going to operate efficiently, who's not going to give themselves raises and enrichment. There are people who are actually going to do it because they believe in it. And I really believe in that strongly. I got my spirit of public service from my parents, who were public school teachers and worked for very little their entire lives, because they believed in what they were doing. And I saw the results in their classroom kids who came back to visit them year after year. We need to have that kind of sense of spirit of public service in our government again. We're done with reality show stars. We're done with ideological warriors. We want grown-ups in the room solving problems and serving. And that's why I'm proud to be running for governor right now. Thank you so much. I'll stay for a little bit and talk. Thank you so much. Just as all of you are, I have been very upset when you see children being taken from their parents, particularly parents and children who are running from violence in situations in Central America. And then we do this to them and separate those children. You know, the zero tolerance policy is doing nothing but, I think, feeding the base of the president and feeding the base of Governor Ducey. And I'm convinced that part of the reason why we haven't solved this immigration problem yet is because there are certain people who believe it's a powerful political tool unsolved. There are solutions we can do, and we can make that happen. And one of those is helping to do economic development strategies with a lot of the areas in Central America and Southern Mexico where a lot of people come from, so they can have a decent life at home without having to come anywhere else. So we can solve the problem at the root of the problem. But in the meantime, as long as we've got kids separated from their families, we need to make sure that they're being kept safe in this state. And there have been allegations that some of these places where they have kept these kids have been subject to abuse. So I have been asking for a legislative tour, and I have had no results whatsoever of people saying that they're willing to have us come in from these companies. The Southwest Key Company has been trying to put it through. But what I did last Friday is I delivered a letter to the director of the Department of Child Safety, where I got 38 of my colleagues to sign on to the letter demanding that the DCS send caseworkers to investigate at all these facilities where these kids are being held to make sure that they are not being abused. It's not going to get solved by sending a governor and his wife or the president's wife on a media tour. It's going to get solved when you have actual child welfare caseworkers investigating to see what's going on. I mean, just at its very basic. When you wrest a kid away from her parent and they don't even know where their parents are, that's a dramatic, traumatic situation that will last them for a lifetime. So that is by definition abuse in the first place. Yeah. Let's not make sure it's getting worse in the first, when we get that done. So we're going to do what we can within the state. Those entities are licensed by the Department of Health Services. They only inspect them on a prearranged appointment, like every 18 months or so. We need to have a regular series of surprise inspections to see what's really going on based on the allegations we have seen, and assure that this is not happening in our state to make that happen. As governor, I will be pressuring the federal government to finally solve this problem and have actual comprehensive immigration reform, and not keep the problem alive for the sake of political purpose.